Captain Sarah "Ghost" Martinez adjusted her helmet one final time as the morning sun cast long shadows across the forward operating base in Afghanistan. The year was 2011, and the war was at its peak intensity. Sarah had earned her call sign not for being invisible, but for her uncanny ability to appear exactly where the enemy least expected her. At 28 years old, Sarah was one of the few female Apache helicopter pilots in active combat duty. Her AH-64D Apache longbow sat on the tarmac like a sleeping predator, its sensors and weapons systems ready for another day of close air support missions. The helicopter's gray and green camouflage paint was already showing wear from months of desert operations, and bullet holes from previous encounters had been patched with fresh metal. The briefing room buzzed with tension that morning. Intelligence reports indicated that a convoy of Marines was pinned down in a valley 30 miles northeast of their position. Taliban fighters had taken positions in the surrounding hills, using the rocky terrain to their advantage. What made this mission particularly dangerous was the presence of shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles that the enemy had recently acquired. Sarah's co-pilot and gunner, Lieutenant James "Hawk" Thompson, spread the mission maps across the table. Hawk was a seasoned veteran who had flown over 200 combat missions. His steady hands and sharp eyes had saved their lives more times than either of them could count. The two had developed an almost telepathic communication during their months flying together. "The Marines are trapped in Grid Square Echo 7, Hawk explained, pointing to a narrow valley on the map. "Enemy positions are here, here, and here," he continued, marking red circles on the hillsides. "Intel suggests at least 40 fighters with heavy weapons and possibly SA-7 missiles." The SA-7 surface-to-air missiles were a particular concern. These Soviet-era weapons were relatively simple to operate but deadly effective against helicopters. The missiles used heat-seeking technology, locking onto the hot exhaust of aircraft engines. One successful hit could bring down even the heavily armored Apache. Sarah studied the terrain carefully. The valley was surrounded by steep hills that provided perfect concealment for enemy fighters. The Marines were positioned at the valley's center, making any rescue attempt extremely risky. Traditional approach routes would expose her Apache to concentrated fire from multiple directions. "What about the weather?" Sarah asked, noting the meteorological data. "Winds are calm, visibility good, but there's a possibility of dust storms later in the day," replied Major Williams, the mission commander. "That could work for or against us, depending on timing." The mission timeline was critical. The Marines had been under fire for 3 hours and were running low on ammunition. Medical evacuation was impossible until the area was secured, and several wounded soldiers needed immediate attention. Every minute of delay increased the risk of casualties. Sarah's mind raced through tactical possibilities. The standard approach would be to fly in fast and low, using the Apache's speed and firepower to suppress enemy positions. However, with surface-to-air missiles in play, this strategy carried enormous risk. The enemy would be expecting such an approach. "I want to try something different," Sarah announced, her voice calm but determined. "Instead of coming in fast and low, I'm going to take us high and slow. Let them see us coming." The room fell silent. This approach went against conventional wisdom for helicopter combat operations. Flying high made aircraft more visible to enemy fighters and provided less terrain masking. Flying slow eliminated the element of surprise and gave enemies more time to acquire targets. Hawk raised an eyebrow, but didn't question her decision. He had learned to trust Sarah's unconventional thinking. Her previous missions had succeeded precisely because she refused to follow predictable patterns. "The enemy will expect us to hug the terrain," Sarah continued. "They'll have their missiles and RPGs positioned accordingly. If we come in from an unexpected angle and altitude, we might catch them off guard." Major Williams looked skeptical. "Captain, you're talking about making yourself a sitting duck. Those SA-7s have a range of several miles." "Yes, sir, but they also have limitations," Sarah replied. The missiles work best against targets flying away from the launcher, not approaching head-on. And if we stay above their optimal engagement envelope initially, we can dictate the terms of engagement. The plan was risky, but Sarah had identified a tactical advantage that others had missed. The SA-7 missiles, while dangerous, had specific engagement parameters. By approaching from an unexpected direction and altitude, she could potentially neutralize their effectiveness while maintaining her Apache's firepower advantage. 30 minutes later, Sarah and Hawk completed their pre-flight checks and lifted off into the clear morning sky. The Apache rose smoothly, its twin engines producing the distinctive whop-whop sound of rotor blades cutting through air. Below them, the forward operating base grew smaller as they climbed to their cruising altitude. The flight to the target area took 25 minutes. During this time, Sarah maintained radio contact with the trapped Marines, gathering real-time intelligence about enemy positions and movements. The Marine commander, Captain Rodriguez, provided updates on their tactical situation while trying to keep his voice steady despite the constant incoming fire. "Ghost, this is Reaper 6, Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. "We've got confirmed RPG positions on the North Ridge and automatic weapons fire from the south. Be advised, we saw missile launches earlier, so they definitely have man-portable air defense systems." "Copy that, Reaper 6, Sarah responded. "We're 10 minutes out. Keep your heads down and mark your positions with smoke when we arrive." As they approached the target area, Sarah could see the valley stretched out below them. Puffs of smoke and dust marked where explosions were occurring. The Marines' position was clearly visible, surrounded by rocky outcroppings where enemy fighters had taken cover. Sarah began her unconventional approach, climbing to 8,000 feet above the valley floor. This altitude put them well within range of enemy weapons, but also provided a commanding view of the entire battlefield. Hawk activated the Apache's sophisticated targeting systems, using thermal imaging to identify enemy positions. "I've got multiple heat signatures on the ridge lines," Hawk reported. "Looks like they're concentrated in 3 main groups, just like intelligence predicted." The enemy fighters had indeed positioned themselves to ambush helicopters using traditional low-level attack approaches. Their weapons were oriented toward the valley entrance, expecting aircraft to come in fast and low. Sarah's high-altitude approach had caught them unprepared. "Ghost, be advised we're seeing movement on the hills," Captain Rodriguez radioed. "They're repositioning, probably trying to get a shot at you." Sarah watched as enemy fighters scrambled to adjust their positions. Some were attempting to move anti-aircraft weapons to target her Apache, but their movements were slow and obvious from her elevated position. This confusion was exactly what she had hoped to achieve. The first phase of her plan was working. By doing the unexpected, she had gained a temporary tactical advantage. However, the real test was yet to come. Once she began her attack, the enemy would quickly adapt, and the Apache would become the focus of concentrated fire from multiple directions. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared for the most dangerous part of the mission. The Marines below were counting on her, and there was no room for error. In the next few minutes, her unconventional tactics would either prove brilliant or cost lives. The battlefield stretched out below them like a deadly chessboard, and Sarah was about to make her opening move. Sarah initiated her attack by rolling the Apache into a steep diving turn, using gravity to build speed while maintaining her targeting advantage. The helicopter's sophisticated fire control system locked onto the first enemy position, a cluster of fighters on the northern ridge who were setting up what appeared to be a heavy machine gun. "Target acquired, North Ridge, range 2,000 meters, Hawk announced, his voice steady despite the danger. The Apache's 30mm chain gun swiveled smoothly, tracking the target with mechanical precision. "Engaging," Sarah replied, and squeezed the trigger. The chain gun erupted in a controlled burst of devastating firepower. High explosive rounds streaked across the valley, finding their mark among the rocky outcroppings where enemy fighters had taken position. Dust and debris erupted skyward as the rounds impacted, silencing the machine gun position instantly. But the enemy response was immediate and intense. Tracer rounds began streaking upward from multiple positions, creating deadly light shows against the morning sky. The fighters had quickly realized that their new threat was coming from above rather than from the expected low-level approach. "Taking fire from multiple positions," Hawk reported, his eyes scanning the thermal display. "I count at least 6 separate sources." Sarah banked the Apache hard to the right, using the helicopter's agility to present a moving target while maintaining offensive capability. The maneuver was aggressive, pushing both the aircraft and crew to their limits. G-forces pressed them into their seats as the helicopter carved a tight arc through the air. An ominous white trail suddenly appeared from the southern ridge, rising rapidly toward their position. Someone had launched a surface-to-air missile. "Missile inbound!" Hawk shouted, his training taking over as he activated the Apache's countermeasure systems. Sarah had been expecting this moment. Instead of diving away from the missile, as conventional tactics dictated, she pulled the Apache into a climbing spiral. The missile, designed to intercept aircraft flying away from the launcher, struggled to maintain lock on a target moving almost directly overhead. Chaff and flare dispensers erupted from the helicopter, creating a cloud of metallic strips and heat sources to confuse the missile's guidance system. The SA-7 missile, overwhelmed by false targets and the unusual flight profile, lost lock and spiraled harmlessly into the mountainside below. "Splash 1!" Hawk called out, using the military term for a successful missile defense. But there was no time to celebrate. The enemy was adapting quickly to the new threat. Radio chatter in Pashto filled the airwaves as fighters coordinated their response. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions as automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades sought to bring down her aircraft. "Ghost, this is Reaper 6, Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through the battle noise. "You've got their attention now. They're pulling back from our position to focus on you." This development was both good and bad news. The Marines were getting some relief from the concentrated fire they had been receiving, but Sarah's Apache was now the primary target for every enemy weapon in the valley. Sarah continued her unconventional tactics, using the Apache's superior altitude and firepower to engage targets that couldn't effectively return fire. She targeted ammunition caches and weapon positions, creating secondary explosions that further disrupted enemy operations. "Target-rich environment," Hawk observed, acquiring another group of fighters who were attempting to set up a mortar position. Hellfire missile armed and ready. The AGM-114 Hellfire missile was the Apache's most devastating weapon, capable of destroying armored vehicles or fortified positions with pinpoint accuracy. Sarah selected a cluster of enemies who had taken cover behind large boulders, thinking themselves safe from direct fire weapons. "Fox 3, Sarah announced, using the standard call for missile launch. The Hellfire missile streaked away from the Apache with a bright flame trail, guided by laser designation from Hawk's targeting system. The weapon covered the distance to target in seconds, impacting with tremendous force among the enemy position. The explosion echoed across the valley, and when the smoke cleared, the threat from that location had been eliminated. However, the enemy was learning from each engagement. Fighters began using more sophisticated tactics, coordinating their fire and attempting to force the Apache into predetermined kill zones. Radio intercepts indicated they were calling for reinforcements, including additional surface-to-air missiles. "Ghost, we're picking up radio traffic about more missiles inbound to your area," warned the intelligence officer at base. "Recommend you expedite mission completion." Sarah knew that time was running out. Each passing minute allowed more enemy fighters to arrive and better coordinate their defenses. She needed to complete the mission quickly while maintaining tactical advantage. The Apache dove toward another enemy position. This one consisting of fighters armed with RPGs positioned in a natural cave formation. These weapons were particularly dangerous to helicopters, as the rocket-propelled grenades could cause catastrophic damage even with a near miss. As Sarah approached the cave positions, her peripheral vision caught another missile launch. This one was coming from a different direction, indicating that the enemy had moved additional surface-to-air assets into the area. "Second missile launch, bearing 270, Hawk called out, beginning the countermeasure sequence again. This missile was fired from a better position with an optimal engagement angle. The SA-7 guidance system acquired lock on the Apache's heat signature and began tracking steadily. Sarah realized that conventional evasive maneuvers might not be sufficient this time. Instead of trying to outrun or confuse the missile, Sarah did something completely unexpected. She turned the Apache directly toward the missile, presenting the smallest possible heat signature while using the aircraft's frontal armor to protect vital systems. The maneuver was incredibly dangerous. If the missile maintained lock, impact would be head-on with potentially catastrophic results. However, Sarah had calculated that the missile's guidance system would have difficulty maintaining track on a target approaching directly toward the launcher. The gamble paid off. The missile seeker head lost lock as the Apache approached almost head-on, and the weapon passed harmlessly underneath the aircraft. But Sarah's relief was short-lived as she noticed something troubling on her instrument panel. The Apache's engine temperature indicators were showing elevated readings. Sustained high-power operations in the thin mountain air, combined with the stress of combat maneuvering, were pushing the engines toward their operational limits. "Hawk, keep an eye on engine temps," Sarah instructed. "We might need to throttle back if things get worse." Reducing power would limit their tactical options significantly. The Apache's speed and agility were crucial for surviving in the hostile environment they were operating in. Despite the mechanical concerns, Sarah continued pressing the attack. The Marines below were depending on her to neutralize the remaining threats. Using careful target selection and precise weapons employment, she systematically eliminated enemy positions while conserving ammunition and fuel. Each successful engagement improved the situation for the trapped Marines, but also increased the danger to her own aircraft. The remaining enemy fighters were now fully aware of the Apache's capabilities and limitations, and they were adapting their tactics accordingly. The battle was entering its most critical phase. Sarah had achieved tactical surprise and eliminated numerous threats, but the enemy was far from defeated. More importantly, her Apache was beginning to show signs of stress from the extended combat operations. Radio chatter indicated that enemy reinforcements were approaching the area, including additional anti-aircraft weapons. Sarah realized that she was rapidly approaching the point where continued operations would become untenable. The decision point was approaching fast. She could either continue the attack and risk losing her aircraft, or begin withdrawal procedures while she still had tactical advantage. But looking down at the Marines' position, surrounded by remaining enemy fighters, she knew that withdrawal was not really an option. Sarah steeled herself for what was to come. The most dangerous part of the mission was just beginning, and the next few minutes would determine whether her unconventional tactics would result in victory or disaster. The situation was about to become critical when Sarah's radio crackled with an unexpected transmission from an enemy fighter who had somehow accessed their communication frequency. The voice spoke in heavily accented English, taunting and threatening. "American helicopter, you are brave but foolish," the voice said. "We have many missiles waiting for you. Soon, you will burn like the others." Sarah's response was immediate and unexpected. Instead of maintaining radio silence or responding with anger, she began to laugh. It wasn't a nervous laugh or a forced one, but genuine amusement that carried clearly over the radio channel. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said, her voice still carrying traces of laughter. "You guys have been shooting at helicopters all wrong. Let me show you how it's really done." Hawk looked at his pilot with surprise, but quickly understood her psychological warfare tactics. By laughing at their threats, Sarah was demonstrating confidence and potentially causing doubt among enemy fighters. More importantly, she was about to make good on her promise. Sarah rolled the Apache into an aggressive diving attack, targeting the largest remaining concentration of enemy fighters. But instead of using conventional tactics, she began what could only be described as aerial acrobatics. The helicopter dove, climbed, rolled, and turned in patterns that seemed to defy both logic and physics. The enemy fighters found themselves unable to track the aircraft effectively. Every time they acquired a target lock, Sarah would execute another unpredictable maneuver that broke their firing solution. Her laughter continued to echo over the radio as she pressed home the attack. "Hellfire missile away," Hawk announced, sending another precision strike into an enemy stronghold. The Apache's weapon systems worked with mechanical precision, eliminating threats with surgical accuracy, while Sarah's unconventional flying kept them alive. Her laughter had become almost legendary among the enemy fighters, who found themselves psychologically destabilized by the unexpected response to their threats. But Sarah's celebration was premature. Intelligence reports were coming in about a new threat approaching the area. A convoy of vehicles carrying additional fighters and heavy weapons was moving toward the valley, including truck-mounted anti-aircraft guns that could pose a serious threat to her helicopter. "Ghost, be advised. We have eyes on a convoy approximately 5 miles south of your position," the intelligence officer radioed. "Multiple vehicles, appears to be reinforcements with heavy weapons." Sarah knew that allowing these reinforcements to reach the valley would complicate the situation enormously. The truck-mounted weapons would provide the enemy with much more effective anti-aircraft capability than the shoulder-fired missiles they had been using. "Hawk, can you get a lock on that convoy?" Sarah asked. "Negative. They're beyond our sensor range," Hawk replied. "We'd need to move closer to engage." Moving to intercept the convoy would mean leaving the Marines temporarily without close air support. It was a difficult tactical decision, but Sarah realized that preventing the reinforcements from arriving was crucial for mission success. "Reaper 6, this is Ghost," Sarah radioed to the Marine commander. "We're going to intercept enemy reinforcements. Can you hold your position for 10 minutes? "Ghost, we've got wounded who need immediate evacuation," Captain Rodriguez replied. "But if you can keep those reinforcements away, we can hold." Sarah banked the Apache toward the approaching convoy, pushing the aircraft to maximum speed. The helicopter's engines, already stressed from extended combat operations, responded with increased power despite the elevated temperature readings. The convoy was moving along a mountain road that provided limited cover from air attack. Sarah could see dust clouds marking their progress as multiple vehicles raced toward the battle area. Intelligence estimates suggested at least 6 vehicles, including trucks carrying fighters and weapons. "Multiple targets on the road," Hawk reported as they approached weapons range. "I count 6 vehicles, including what appears to be a truck with a mounted gun." The truck-mounted anti-aircraft gun was the primary threat. These weapons were much more effective against helicopters than individual surface-to-air missiles, particularly when operated by experienced crews. Sarah began her attack run while the convoy was still moving, hoping to catch them before they could deploy their weapons effectively. The lead vehicle was a pickup truck filled with fighters, followed by larger trucks carrying equipment and personnel. "Engaging lead vehicle," Sarah announced, opening fire with the 30mm chain gun. High explosive rounds impacted the pickup truck, causing it to veer off the road and roll down the mountainside. But the remaining vehicles quickly dispersed, with drivers taking their trucks off the road and seeking cover among the rocky terrain. The truck with the anti-aircraft gun had stopped and was beginning to deploy its weapon. Sarah could see fighters jumping out to set up the gun in a position where it could effectively engage her helicopter, This was the moment of maximum danger. The anti-aircraft gun had much greater range and lethality than anything the enemy had used so far. If they successfully deployed the weapon, her Apache would be in serious jeopardy. Sarah made a split-second decision that would define the entire mission. Instead of maintaining safe distance and trying to engage with missiles, she dove directly toward the anti-aircraft gun position, using speed and aggression to prevent them from completing their setup. "Ghost, what are you doing?" Hawk asked, recognizing the extreme danger of the maneuver. "Trust me," Sarah replied, her voice calm despite the circumstances. The Apache dove toward the gun position at maximum speed, presenting a difficult target while closing to point-blank range. Enemy fighters scattered as the helicopter approached, unable to complete their weapon deployment under direct attack. Sarah's 30mm chain gun erupted again, destroying the truck and its mounted weapon before it could be brought into action. The secondary explosion from the truck's ammunition supply created a massive fireball that eliminated the entire threat, but the aggressive maneuver had consequences. Warning lights began illuminating on the Apache's instrument panel as the stressed engines finally began showing signs of serious malfunction. Oil pressure was dropping on the number 2 engine, and temperature readings were climbing into the red zone. "We've got engine problems," Hawk reported, his voice tense. "Number 2 engine is showing multiple warning indicators." Sarah knew that operating with a damaged engine in a hostile environment was extremely dangerous. The Apache could fly on one engine, but performance would be severely degraded, making them vulnerable to enemy fire. "Can we make it back to base?" Sarah asked. "Maybe, but we need to minimize power settings and avoid any aggressive maneuvering," Hawk replied. The situation had suddenly become much more complex. Sarah had successfully eliminated the primary threats to the Marines, but her own aircraft was now in jeopardy. She needed to extract from the area quickly while providing enough cover for the Marines to be evacuated. "Reaper 6, this is Ghost," Sarah radioed. "Area is clear for medical evacuation. We've neutralized the primary threats, but our aircraft has mechanical issues." "Copy that, Ghost," Captain Rodriguez replied. "Medical evacuation helicopters are already inbound. Thanks for saving our lives." Sarah began a careful withdrawal from the area, nursing the damaged Apache toward home base. The number 2 engine was still running, but oil pressure continued to drop, indicating that complete failure was possible at any moment. As they climbed away from the valley, Sarah's radio crackled one final time with the enemy fighter who had been taunting her earlier. This time, however, his tone was very different. "American helicopter pilot," the voice said, much more respectfully. "You are very skilled. We will remember this day." Sarah smiled, her earlier laughter having achieved more than just psychological warfare. She had earned the respect of her enemies while saving the lives of fellow Americans. The flight back to base was tense, with multiple warning systems indicating that engine failure was imminent. Hawk continuously monitored their systems, while Sarah flew as smoothly as possible to minimize stress on the damaged engine. They made it to base with just minutes to spare. As Sarah touched down on the landing pad, the number 2 engine finally seized completely, trailing smoke and requiring immediate shutdown. Emergency crews rushed to the aircraft as Sarah and Hawk completed their post-flight procedures. Later investigation revealed that the engine had suffered multiple internal failures due to sustained high-power operations in demanding conditions. The Apache had literally been flown beyond its design limits during the mission. But the mission was an unqualified success. All Marines were successfully evacuated, with wounded personnel receiving life-saving medical treatment. The enemy convoy had been destroyed, preventing reinforcements from reaching the area. Most importantly, Sarah's unconventional tactics had proven that thinking beyond standard procedures could achieve victory even in seemingly impossible situations. The story of the laughing Apache pilot spread quickly throughout the military community. Sarah's psychological warfare techniques, combined with her exceptional flying skills, had created a new model for helicopter combat operations. Years later, military historians would study the engagement as an example of how individual initiative and unconventional thinking could overcome superior enemy numbers and firepower. Sarah's laughter over the radio, followed by devastating precision attacks, had become legendary among both American forces and their enemies. The mission demonstrated that sometimes the best response to threats and intimidation is confidence and competence, backed up by the skill to make good on your promises. Sarah Martinez had shown that even in the deadliest circumstances, maintaining psychological advantage could be as important as superior firepower. Her Apache may have been damaged, but her reputation as an exceptional combat pilot was firmly established. The enemy fighters who had threatened her that day would indeed remember the encounter, but not for the reasons they had originally intended.